Factory workers pose outside the mill. 90 years later, researchers zoom in and make a chilling discovery. Elena Merrick's fingers hovered over the keyboard as the image on her screen slowly came into focus. The photograph, faded, creased, and worn at the edges, showed a crowd of mill workers posing outside the imposing brick facade of the Dunridge Cotton Works. Their faces, grim yet proud, stared back at her across 90 years of silence. It's the mill anniversary photo from 1934. Her supervisor, Dr. Rebecca Chin, noted from over her shoulder. Found it in a box of uncatalogued materials donated by the old town hall. Thought you might want to digitize it for the archive. Elena nodded, adjusting her glasses as she examined the image more closely. The Dunridge Historical Society's cramped basement office wasn't exactly where she had imagined spending her summer after graduating with a history degree, but her grandmother's stories about growing up in this Rust Belt town had always fascinated her. This was personal. Look at their faces, Elena murmured, zooming in on the front row. You can almost feel how important this moment was to them. The Depression-era workers stood in neat rows, the men with their caps either clutched respectfully in their hands or tilted at proud angles on their heads. The women wore simple cotton dresses, their hair pinned back severely. Behind them loomed the mill, a cathedral of industry that had once been the beating heart of Dunridge. Now it stood abandoned at the edge of town, its windows smashed, its glory faded to rust and graffiti. Elena adjusted the image enhancement software, sharpening the details. Something about the symmetry felt off. She squinted at the screen. Dr. Chen, did you notice this before? She asked, pointing to a window in the upper left corner of the mill. There's something in the window. Dr. Chen leaned closer, her brow furrowing. I didn't see that. Probably just a reflection or a processing artifact. But Elena wasn't convinced. She zoomed in further, the pixels blurring then clarifying as the software rendered the details. There, pressed against the dusty glass of a third-floor window, was the unmistakable outline of a human hand. That's no reflection, Elena whispered, her heartbeat quickening. Someone was inside the mill during the photo. That's odd, Dr. Chen replied, reaching for her reading glasses. According to the documentation, the mill was closed that day for the celebration and electrical maintenance. No one should have been inside. Elena manipulated the image further, enhancing the contrast around the window. Behind the splayed fingers, a face began to emerge from the shadows, pale, gaunt, and looking directly at the camera with what appeared to be desperate intensity. My God, Dr. Chen breathed. Do you see that? Elena felt a chill creep up her spine despite the summer heat permeating the basement office. Who is that? And why doesn't he look happy? Everyone else in this photo is celebrating. The office fell silent as they both stared at the haunting image. The face in the window seemed to be mouthing something, lips parted in what could be a shout or a plea. Elena checked the Historical Society's database, pulling up the records from that day. The mill's anniversary celebration, July 15, 1934. She read aloud. All employees accounted for in the photograph according to the accompanying roster. Mill owner Theodore Calder presented bonus payments to all workers. Factory closed from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. for the event and scheduled electrical work. Dr. Chen pointed to a note at the bottom of the record. Look at this, photographed by James Holloway, Town Gazette. Maybe the newspaper archives have more information? I'll check, Elena said, already making notes. And we should cross-reference the employee records. If everyone who worked at the mill was outside for the photo, then who was inside? Dr. Chen finished the thought. Elena carefully saved her enhanced version of the photograph, labeling it with the date and a question mark. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes in the window were looking directly at her, not at the camera, not at the crowd, but somehow through time itself, seeking recognition. Later that evening, as the summer sun cast long shadows through the town's empty streets, Elena sat alone in her grandmother's small house on Cedar Lane, the enhanced photograph open on her laptop. Her grandmother had worked at the mill in the 1950s, 2 decades after the photo was taken, but perhaps she knew something. Elena zoomed in once more on the face in the window. The software had revealed more details: hollow cheeks, dark circles under wide eyes, and what appeared to be a bruise or shadow along one side of the jaw. This wasn't just anyone caught unexpectedly in a frame. This was someone trying desperately to be seen. She printed the enhanced image and placed it on her nightstand, unable to look away from the ghostly face. That night, Elena dreamed of brick walls and locked doors, of hands pounding on glass while cameras flashed and people smiled, oblivious to the silent screams behind them. In the morning, she woke with a singular thought that wouldn't leave her. Someone had been forgotten in the mill's history. Someone had been erased. And now, 90 years later, their silent plea had finally reached someone who would listen. Elena didn't know it yet, but the photograph would soon unravel secrets that the town of Dunridge had kept buried for nearly a century, secrets that powerful people still wanted to remain hidden. The Dunridge Public Library's archive room smelled of dust and forgotten memories. Elena hunched over a microfiche reader, squinting at the yellowed pages of the Dunridge Gazette from July 1934. Dr. Chen had granted her a research leave after seeing her initial findings, encouraging her to follow where the evidence leads. Found it, Elena muttered to herself, stopping the scrolling film. The front page of the July 16, 1934 edition featured the same photograph she'd been studying, beneath a bold headline: Dunridge celebrates Mill's decade of prosperity. A smaller subheading read, Calder announces expansion plans following record profits. The accompanying article made no mention of anyone inside the mill during the celebration. Instead, it painted Theodore Calder as a benevolent figure who had shepherded the community through the worst of the Depression without a single layoff. Elena jotted down notes, pausing when she reached a line about the entire workforce of 216 employees being present for the ceremony. 216. She underlined the number twice. Next, she pulled the employment records Dr. Chen had located in the Historical Society's archives. The official mill registry from June 1934 listed 217 employees. She double-checked her count. Yes, 217. Someone was missing from the celebration photograph. Elena spread her notes across the table, aligning them chronologically. The employee registry from May showed 217 names. June showed the same. But the August registry dropped to 216, matching the newspaper's count. What happened to you? She whispered, scanning the lists for the discrepancy. Her finger stopped at a name present in May and June but absent in August: Albert, Albie, Finch, listed as maintenance and janitorial. No reason was given for his departure. No transfer notes, no termination record, nothing to indicate where he had gone. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Found supervisor logs from 1934 in unmarked box. Interesting entries around July. 20 minutes later, they met at a coffee shop halfway between the library and the Historical Society. Dr. Chen slid a folder across the table to Elena, her face grave. Read the entries from July 10 through 17. She said quietly. Something doesn't add up. The leather-bound log contained daily notes from the mill's floor supervisor, Marcus Wesley. The handwriting was cramped but legible. July 10, 1934. A. Finch failed to report for shift. No notice given. July 11, 1934. A. Finch absent again. Sent boy to his boarding house. Landlady says hasn't seen him in days. Personal effects still there. July 12, 1934. A. Finch now missing 3 days. Reported to Mr. Calder. He seemed unconcerned, said Finch likely moved on looking for better wages elsewhere. No action to be taken. July 13, 1934. Preparations for anniversary celebration underway. Mill to be thoroughly cleaned. July 14, 1934. Electrical maintenance crew reports unusual sounds from boiler room. Investigated, nothing found. Likely rats in the walls. July 15, 1934. Anniversary celebration. All workers present, excepting A. Finch, presumed terminated. July 17, 1934. Mr. Calder orders East Wing schematics revised. Maintenance shaft behind boiler room to be sealed off as unnecessary fire hazard. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she closed the log. The timing can't be coincidental, she said. Finch disappears, strange noises are reported, and then immediately after the celebration, Calder orders a section of the mill sealed off? Dr. Chen nodded grimly. There's more. I found schematics of the mill from 1932 and 1935. The 1935 version shows significant changes to the East Wing layout. The window where you saw the hand and face? According to the revised plans, that room no longer existed after August 1934. Elena pulled out her copy of the enhanced photograph. We need to find out who Albie Finch was, she said, and why he disappeared right before the celebration. There's someone who might know, Dr. Chen replied. Martha Dunbar, age 97. Her father was Wesley's assistant supervisor at the mill. She still lives at the Willow Creek nursing home. As they gathered their materials, Elena hesitated. Dr. Chen, does it seem strange to you that these records were just lying around? Unsealed and accessible, but somehow never connected before? Dr. Chen's expression darkened. History isn't always buried, Elena. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight because nobody asked the right questions. She glanced around the half-empty coffee shop. And sometimes, asking those questions can make powerful people nervous. On their way out, either of them noticed the elderly man at the corner table who had been listening intently, his weathered hands gripping a newspaper that hadn't been turned in over an hour. He watched them leave, then slowly pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It's happening, he said simply. Someone finally found the photograph. Martha Dunbar's hands trembled as she held the enhanced photograph. For a moment, her rheumy eyes seemed to clear, focusing with sudden intensity on the face in the window. You shouldn't have brought this here, she whispered, trying to hand it back to Elena. Some things are best left forgotten. Elena and Dr. Chen exchanged glances across the small table in the nursing home's visiting area. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, casting the room in a grim, gray light. Mrs. Dunbar, Elena said gently. We believe this is Albert Finch in the photograph. Did you know him? The old woman's face tightened. Albie? Of course I knew Albie. Everyone did. Quiet man, kept to himself mostly. Foreign Italian, I think. Good with his hands. She hesitated. My father always said he was the best machinist they had, though they only let him work as a janitor. A machinist? Dr. Chen asked, leaning forward. His employment record listed him as maintenance staff. Martha's laugh was hollow. Records. What do records tell you but what someone wanted written down? She tapped the photograph with a gnarled finger. This is what happens when people see what they're not supposed to see. A chill ran through Elena. What do you mean? The old woman's gaze shifted to the rain-streaked window. My daddy used to say, some things weren't meant to be seen through glass. I never understood what he meant until years later, when I found him crying at the kitchen table one night. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was July 1934. I was just a girl, 6 years old. He'd been drinking, which wasn't like him. He kept saying, I didn't know, over and over. When I asked what was wrong, he just looked at me and said, we all looked the other way, Martha. We all heard him, but we looked the other way. Dr. Chen produced a notebook. Mrs. Dunbar, do you know what happened to Albie Finch? The old woman stared into the middle distance, lost in memory. The depression was bad everywhere, but especially here. Calder kept the mill running when others shut down. People were desperate to keep their jobs. When rumors started about him housing illegal immigrants in the mill to work night shifts, nobody asked questions. Illegal immigrants? Elena repeated. Martha nodded. Workers without papers. They'd work overnight, sleep in hidden rooms during the day. Paid almost nothing, threatened with deportation if they complained. Calder saved money, made more profit. But Albie. Her voice trailed off. What about Albie? Elena pressed. He found out something worse was happening. Something about the night shifts. Martha's hands began to shake again. My father said Albie threatened to go to the authorities. Then he just disappeared. And no one investigated? Dr. Chen asked incredulously. Martha's laugh was bitter. Investigate what? A missing janitor with no family, no connections? The sheriff was Calder's brother-in-law. The mayor owed him money. The newspaper. She gestured at the photograph. Well, you've seen how they reported things. Elena pulled out another document. I found records showing that within a year of this photo being taken, the Calder family sold the mill, despite its profitability. They moved to Connecticut and never returned to Dunridge. Of course they didn't, Martha said. Not after what they did. A sound at the doorway made them all turn. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there, a forced smile on his face. Mrs. Dunbar, he said smoothly. I didn't know you had visitors. The old woman's face went pale. Richard, she whispered. Elena stood. I'm Elena Merrick from the Dunridge Historical Society, and this is Dr. Chen. We're researching the mill's history. The man's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. Richard Calder, he said, extending his hand. Theodore Calder was my great-grandfather. The family foundation still oversees the Dunbar wing of this facility. He glanced pointedly at Martha. We take care of our own in Dunridge. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Martha's hands clutched at the bedsheets. I was just telling these young ladies about how generous your family has always been, she said, her voice suddenly empty of all its previous emotion. Richard Calder's smile widened. I'm sure you have many fascinating stories, Mrs. Dunbar. But I wouldn't want to tire you out. He turned to Elena and Dr. Chen. Perhaps we could continue this conversation elsewhere? I'd be happy to provide you with the Foundation's official historical materials. As they gathered their belongings, Elena slipped the photograph back into her folder. Martha caught her wrist with surprising strength. The East Wing, she whispered, so quietly Elena had to lean in to hear. Behind the boiler room. He's still there. Outside, in the parking lot, Richard Calder's pleasant demeanor vanished. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said coldly, but the mill's history is well documented. We don't need amateur historians stirring up trouble with wild theories. We're just following the evidence, Elena replied, matching his tone. His eyes narrowed. Some doors are better left closed, Ms. Merrick. For everyone's sake. He handed her a business card. Call my office when you're ready to discuss this professionally. As he walked away, Dr. Chen whispered, I think we just met someone who very much wants to keep the past buried. Elena watched Calder's expensive car pull away. Too bad for him, she said quietly. Because I think I know exactly where to dig next. The abandoned Dunridge Cotton Works loomed against the twilight sky like a massive brick tombstone. Elena's flashlight beam danced across the crumbling facade as she approached the chain-link fence surrounding the property. Dr. Chen and Michael Santos, a documentary filmmaker friend, close behind her. I still can't believe we're doing this, Michael muttered, adjusting his camera backpack. That permit from the city inspector was suspiciously easy to get. Thank Professor Reeves in the Urban Planning Department, Dr. Chen replied. His historical preservation assessment gave us legal access, at least on paper. Elena examined the padlocked gate, then pointed to a section of fence where the links had been cut and folded back. Looks like we're not the first curious visitors. Local kids probably, Michael said. This place must be Ghost Story Central. If they only knew, Elena whispered. Inside, the mill was a cathedral of decay. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across rusted machinery and debris-strewn floors. Their footsteps echoed in the cavernous main production floor as Elena consulted the mill schematics on her tablet. According to the 1932 plans, the east wing access should be through that corridor, she said, pointing to a darkened passageway. The boiler room would be on the basement level. Michael's camera light illuminated their path as they descended a set of metal stairs, each step groaning under their weight. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of mildew and rust. "There," Dr. Chen said, shining her light on a faded sign, "Boiler room authorized personnel only." The massive iron door stood partially ajar, its hinges corroded by decades of neglect. It took all three of them to pull it open wide enough to enter. Inside, the abandoned boiler rose from the floor like a prehistoric beast, its metal skin flaking with rust. Ancient gauges and pipes covered the walls, frozen at their last readings from decades ago. "The maintenance shaft should be behind the northeast wall," Elena said, comparing the 1932 and 1935 schematics. "This section here was modified in the later plans, completely walled off." They circled the massive boiler until they reached the back wall. Unlike the other walls of exposed brick, this one was covered in a layer of newer concrete, now cracked and discolored with age. "This was added later," Dr. Chen confirmed, running her hand over the surface. "Much less weathered than the original walls." Michael panned his camera across the sealed wall. "So how do we get through?" Elena pointed to a section near the floor where the concrete had begun to crumble, revealing the outline of what appeared to be a doorway. "I think someone already started the job for us." It took an hour of careful work with the hand tools they'd brought before they'd cleared enough concrete to expose an old metal door, its surface dented and scratched from the inside. Elena hesitated, her hand on the rusted handle. "Whatever we find in there, there's no going back." The door swung open with a sound like a muffled scream. The beam of Elena's flashlight cut through decades of darkness, revealing a narrow room with a single window, the same window from the photograph. The walls were bare brick, the floor simple concrete. A rusted metal bed frame stood against one wall, its thin mattress rotted to almost nothing. Next to it, a small table held the remains of what might have been a lunch pail and a worker's cap, now collapsed with decay. "My God!" Dr. Chen whispered. Michael's camera light illuminated something else. Metal rings bolted to the wall near the bed, attached to rusted chains. "Shackles," Elena said, her voice hollow. "He wasn't just locked in, he was chained." Dr. Chen moved closer to examine the cap on the table. Carefully, she turned it over with a gloved hand. Faded stitching on the inner band was just visible. "AF. Albie Finch," she confirmed. Elena moved to the window, placing her hand against the glass in the same position as the hand in the photograph. "He was right here, trying to get someone's attention while everyone celebrated outside. Look at this," Michael called from the corner of the room. His light illuminated what appeared to be a trapdoor in the floor. Working together, they managed to lift the heavy wooden door, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. "I'm getting some serious horror movie vibes right now," Michael said, nervously adjusting his camera. The stairs led to a subterranean passage that extended beneath the factory floor. The tunnel was lined with collapsed wooden crates and rotting fabric, mill uniforms by the dozens, never used. "Storage for the night shift workers," Dr. Chen guessed, examining one of the uniforms. "No identifying marks, no factory labels. Nothing that could be traced." Elena's light caught something else, markings on the brick wall. Moving closer, she saw dozens of tally marks scratched into the surface, grouped in sets of 5. At the end of the final row, a message had been carved with desperate force. "Still here." "He was keeping track of the days," Elena whispered. "How long he was imprisoned." "There's something else," Michael said, his camera focused on the floor beneath the tally marks. "The concrete is different here. Newer." Elena knelt down, running her fingers over the uneven patch of floor. "We need to document everything exactly as we found it, then call the police." "The police?" Michael asked. "Elena, this happened 90 years ago. Everyone involved is long gone." "Not everyone," Elena replied grimly. "The Calder family is very much alive. And I want forensic evidence of exactly what their ancestors did here." Dr. Chen was examining the inner side of the window glass. "There are scratch marks here," she said. "From the inside." Elena joined her at the window, shining her light on the glass. Deep scratches marred the surface, fingernails desperately trying to signal to the crowd below. He saw them taking the photograph, Elena said quietly. He knew it might be his only chance to be seen. Michael's camera light suddenly flickered, then died. Battery's dead, he said. That's weird, I charged it fully before we came. Elena's flashlight began to dim as well, the beam growing weaker. Mine too. As the darkness closed in around them, a sudden cold draft swept through the room, carrying what sounded almost like a whisper. Still here. Dr. Chen grabbed Elena's arm. We need to go. Now. Get all the evidence we can to the authorities. As they hurried from the room, Elena paused at the doorway, looking back at the window where Albie Finch had made his final, desperate plea. We see you now, she whispered. And we won't look away. Outside, as they rushed across the factory grounds toward the fence, none of them noticed the silhouette of a man watching from a parked car across the street, his phone pressed to his ear. They found it, Richard Calder said tersely. Exactly where we feared they would. In a shocking discovery that has rocked the community of Dunridge, evidence of historical forced labor and possible finishing has been uncovered at the abandoned Dunridge Cotton Works. The television played in the background as Elena, Dr. Chen, and Michael huddled around a conference table at the Historical Society, surrounded by reporters' business cards and interview requests. I never expected it to blow up like this, Michael said, gesturing at his laptop where their documentary footage had already amassed over 2 million views in just 3 days. We're trending nationwide. Elena sipped her cold coffee, exhaustion etched in the dark circles under her eyes. The forensic team confirmed human remains beneath that patch of concrete. DNA testing will take weeks, but the evidence is consistent with someone having been buried there in the 1930s. The police investigation had moved with surprising speed after their discovery. The state's cold case unit had taken over, bringing in forensic anthropologists to examine the hidden room and the remains. Their preliminary findings had leaked to the press almost immediately. The Calder Family Foundation just released another statement, Dr. Chen said, reading from her phone. While we are deeply troubled by these allegations concerning events from nearly a century ago, we caution against rushing to judgment before a full investigation can be completed. Elena snorted. That's their third statement of concern this week. Empty words while their lawyers try to distance the current family from Theodore Calder's actions. Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Channel 7 just reported that someone broke into the records room at City Hall last night. Files from the 1930s were taken, specifically building permits and property transfers related to the mill. Destroying evidence, Elena muttered. Too late for that. The door to the conference room burst open as Jessica, the Historical Society's assistant, rushed in waving a manila envelope. This just came for you, Elena, by courier. The sender is anonymous. Elena opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. A sticky note attached to the cover read simply, "The truth always finds a way." What is it? Dr. Chen asked, leaning forward. Elena's hands trembled as she opened the book. It's a ledger. Financial records from 1933 to 34. She flipped through the brittle pages. Look at this, night shift payroll, except the amounts are a fraction of the regular wages. And these names don't appear in any official records. Dr. Chen examined a page closely. These notations here, ICE payment, that would be immigration enforcement bribes. And these, LPD monthly, local police payoffs. There's more, Elena said, turning to the final pages. Payments to someone named WM for disposal services and special construction, EW modification. East Wing. Someone wanted us to have this, Michael said. But who? A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Richard Calder storming across the Historical Society's parking lot, 2 men in suits close behind him. I think we're about to find out, Elena said. The confrontation that followed would later be described by witnesses as explosively revealing. Richard Calder demanded the return of stolen Calder family property, claiming the ledger had been taken from his private office. When Elena refused, he threatened legal action against the Historical Society and personal lawsuits against Elena and Dr. Chen. What he didn't know was that Michael was live streaming the entire encounter. "Your great-grandfather imprisoned people," Elena said calmly, as viewers across the country watched. "He worked them to death, and when one of them, Albie Finch, threatened to expose him, he had him finished and buried beneath the mill." "You can't prove any of that," Calder snapped, his composure cracking. "Actually," Dr. Chen interjected, "this ledger here has a very interesting entry from July 16, 1934, the day after the photo was taken." She pointed to a line. "AF situation resolved permanently, $150. The price of a man's life," written in faded ink. 3 days later, the State Attorney General announced a formal investigation into both the historical crimes and potential modern obstruction of justice by the Calder family. Reporters descended on Dunridge like locusts, probing into every aspect of the town's past. Old-timers who had kept silent for decades suddenly found their voices, sharing whispered stories that had been passed down through generations. The school board voted unanimously to revise the local history curriculum. The town council approved funds for a memorial at the mill site. And the Dunridge Historical Society began preparing a permanent exhibition centered around the haunting photograph that had started it all. Martha Dunbar, watching the story unfold from her nursing home room, cried when Elena visited to tell her about the discovery. "My father would be at peace knowing the truth finally came out," she said, clutching Elena's hand. "He carried that guilt to his grave." On a rainy Tuesday, exactly 1 month after their discovery, Elena stood before a solemn crowd at a press conference outside the condemned mill. Construction crews would begin demolition the following week, but not before a proper excavation of the site and a memorial service for Albie Finch and any other victims buried there. "History isn't just what's written in textbooks," Elena told the assembled journalists and townspeople. "It's also what's deliberately omitted. For 90 years, this town carried a secret burden, some knowingly, most ignorantly. But secrets have a way of surfacing." She held up the enhanced photograph, now familiar to millions. "This man was erased from history because he dared to speak up against exploitation and cruelty. His last desperate act was to make sure someone saw him, even as everyone turned away. Today, we finally acknowledge him and all those like him who were meant to remain invisible." As she spoke, she didn't notice the elderly man at the back of the crowd, the same man who had watched her in the coffee shop weeks earlier. He nodded slightly, satisfied, then slipped away as reporters shouted questions. Later that evening, as Elena cleared her desk, she found an envelope that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was a faded photograph she'd never seen before, a young man standing proudly in front of the mill, cap tilted at a jaunty angle, a slight smile on his face. Written on the back in shaky handwriting. "Albert Albie Finch, 1932. My grandfather's friend. The truth always finds a way. Thank you for seeing him." 6 months after the discovery at Dunridge Cotton Works, the mill was gone. In its place stood a small memorial park with a bronze plaque that listed the names of 27 workers, undocumented immigrants from Italy, Poland, and Ireland, who had been identified through Calder's secret ledger as victims of the forced labor scheme. At the center of the list, etched deeper than the others, Albert Albie Finch, 1905 to 1934, who would not remain unseen. The Dunridge Museum of Labor History, formerly the Historical Society, was preparing for the grand opening of its permanent exhibition. What glass conceals the hidden history of Dunridge Mill? Elena had been appointed as the museum's first director, her research and discovery having catapulted her from summer intern to nationally recognized historian almost overnight. Tonight, she was working late, finalizing the multimedia presentation that would be the centerpiece of the exhibition. Michael's documentary had been expanded into a feature-length film that had premiered at Sundance, and portions would play on continuous loop in the museum's theater. "You should go home, get some rest before tomorrow's opening," Dr. Chen said, poking her head into Elena's office. Elena smiled wearily. "I will. I just want to make one final adjustment to the opening display." After Dr. Chen left, Elena returned to the photograph that had started it all. The image of Albie in the window had become iconic, reproduced on t-shirts and posters as a symbol of resistance against exploitation. But something about it still nagged at her, a detail she felt she was missing. The DNA results had confirmed that the remains under the concrete floor belonged to Albert Finch. The forensic analysis suggested he had survived for at least 2 weeks after being imprisoned in that room. The tally marks, 67 of them, told their own grim story. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to see in that desperate face pressed against the glass. She opened her laptop and pulled up the highest resolution scan of the original photograph. The new AI enhancement software that Michael had convinced the museum to purchase had arrived that morning. Designed for historical preservation, it could extract details from damaged or low-quality images with remarkable accuracy. Elena loaded the photograph into the program and focused on the window. The software slowly processed the image, pixel by pixel, extracting data that had been invisible to the naked eye. As the enhancement progressed, Albie's face emerged with startling clarity, hollow cheeks, desperate eyes, and a jagged cut across his forehead that hadn't been visible before. But it was his mouth that caught Elena's attention. Unlike her initial impression of a silent scream, his lips appeared to be moving in a specific pattern. "He's saying something," she whispered to the empty room. She ran the program's motion analysis algorithm, which could detect and reconstruct micro-movements from still images. Frame by frame, the software tracked the position of Albie's lips, reconstructing the movements from the milliseconds before and after the photograph was taken. Elena's breath caught as the words formed on the screen. "They know. All know." She sat back, stunned. This wasn't just a desperate plea for help. It was an accusation. With trembling fingers, she pulled up the original photograph of the crowd outside the mill. Nearly 100 faces stared back at the camera, their expressions a mix of pride and solemnity. She'd studied this image countless times, but now she looked at it with new eyes. They weren't just posing for a celebration. They were standing in formation, perfectly aligned to be visible in the photograph, a photograph that would capture not just them, but also the window where Albie was imprisoned. Elena zoomed in on random faces in the crowd. A foreman with his eyes deliberately focused on his shoes. A line worker staring directly at the camera, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. The mill's supervisor, his face a rigid mask, standing unnaturally stiff. They knew. They all knew he was there. She thought back to Martha Dunbar's words about her father. "We all heard him, but we looked the other way." It wasn't just the Calder family who had orchestrated the cover-up. It was an entire community choosing willful blindness over confronting the horror happening in their midst. Elena pulled out her phone and called Michael. "I need you at the museum. Now. There's something you need to see." An hour later, they stood together in the exhibition hall, staring at the damning evidence projected on the wall. "We have to change the entire framing of the exhibition," Elena said. "This wasn't just about one man's cruelty or a family's dark secret. It was about collective silence. Mass complicity." Michael ran a hand through his hair. "You realize what this means? We're not just accusing Theodore Calder anymore. We're indicting the entire town." "Not indicting," Elena corrected him. "Warning. This is what happens when people choose to look away." The following morning, as crowds gathered for the museum's grand opening, Elena stood beside the enlarged photograph that now dominated the entrance hall. Beneath it was a new caption. "Factory workers pose outside the mill, July 15, 1934. In the third-floor window, Albert Finch, imprisoned, soon to be finished, makes his final plea. His last message, captured but ignored, they know. All know. Sometimes the most deafening sound is silence. Sometimes the greatest crime is simply looking away." As visitors filed in, Elena noticed the elderly man again, standing at the back of the crowd. This time, she approached him directly. "You've been following this story from the beginning," she said. "You're the one who left me Albie's photograph." He nodded, his weathered face solemn. "My name is Joseph Finch. Albie was my great-uncle. My grandfather spent his life trying to find out what happened to his brother. He gestured to the exhibition. This is all he ever wanted, for people to finally see. Elena touched the old man's arm gently. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Joseph's eyes drifted to the photograph on the wall, to the face in the window that had waited 9 decades to be truly seen. Some truths, he said quietly, have to find their own way into the light.